The second Yevamos Daf contains four Mishnayos. The first three in quick succession. The Daf opens with an unrelated discussion, Halacha by Rishim and Reyachai. Then the three Mishnayos discuss the topic of a Kohen who is engaged to someone, and then he becomes Kohen Gadol, but the person he's engaged to is one who a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry. Is he allowed to finish the engagement and do chuppah or not? And then we'll get to the topic of whether a Kohen or even a Kohen Gadol is allowed to marry an islandess, or a Kohen Gadol allowed to marry a Ketana. We'll have a number of reasons for each one why there should be an issue there. Towards the end of the Daf, we'll get our fourth Mishnah for the Daf, which will discuss when a person is allowed to withdraw from doing Pru Revu altogether. So let's begin. We have a statement of Hashem Yachai, and the Gemara will have three questions on it and answers for each of them. The statement of Hashem Bar Yochai is that the kevarim, the kever, the grave of an Oved Kechavim, an idol worshipper, is not Metame Ba'ol, does not carry Tumas Oel. And the reason is that in describing Tumas Oel, the Torah says Odam Kiyamas Ba'ol, that it only applies to an Odam, to someone to whom the term Odam applies. And Hashem Yochai says Odam only applies to Yisrael. How do you see that? Because you have a pasuk in Cheskel which says Va'atein Tzaini Marisi Adam Atem Ani Elokechem. You are Adam, so Yisrael are called Adam, and the Ovdei Kechavim are not called Adam. Therefore, Tomas O, which is written is applying to Adam, does not apply to Ovdei Kechavim. So the Gemara says, I have two kashas. First of all, telling me that Ovdei Kechavim are not called Adam. First of all, Nechamas Midyan, we refer to the captives. We refer to Nefesh Adam, Shisha Asar, 16,000 human captives. So the Gemara says it's not a kasha. They're called Adam in order to differentiate them from the other captives, which are animals. It refers there to the chamayrim, the bakar, and the other animals that were there. So we have to say the word Adam there. But generally, if you just have the term Adam alone, and not in context of animals or something else, Adam refers only to Yisrael. Now the Gemara's second kasha is that in discussing the city of Nineveh in Sefer Yoina, it says, Asher Yesh Baharbi Mishnei Mesrei Riboy Adam Ashal Yada Ben Yaminu. Smell, it has 120,000 Adam people, and those are Ovdei Kechavim for sure. The Gemara says again that is in reference to the context to differentiate from the animals, because it also talks about how many animals were there in that context. So that's the same answer for both of these questions. Now the Gemara's third question is not about Adam, but the Gemara has a proof that the kevarim, that the remains of the Kechavim are metame. And that's again from Nechamas Midyan, where it says Kol Harig Nefesh V'chol Nageh B'chol Tischato. Anybody who had contact with the dead in the war against Midyan, they had to do the spraying of the paraduma on the third and on the seventh day. So you see, they did have Tumas Mace. So what's pshat? How can you tell me that they are not metame? So the Gemara the Gemara offers two answers to this. The Gemara's first approach is to say that Rishon Bar Yochai would say that the ones that were metame were not metame by the akum, not metame by the corpses of the Midyanim. They were metame by the fact that there were some Yisrael who were killed in the war. The Rabbanan would disagree. They would say the Torah tells us, "Lo nifkad mimenu ish," nobody was missing. So you see that there were no Yisrael killed in the war. Now, Rishon Bar Yochai disagreed with that. He said the nifkad mimenu ish was not saying that no one was killed in the war. It's saying that no one was missing from the avera that was performed with the Benos Midyan. Now, the Gemara's second approach to answer the kasha is to say that yes, there were people that were matame by the corpses of the Bnei Midyan, of the Kechavim, but that wasn't through Tumas Oel. Shimon Bar Yochai was only talking about Tumas Oel. He said Tumas Oel does not apply to the graves of Akum. However, there were people who touched the Chalal itself and carried the Chalal itself, carried the corpses, and therefore there is no relevance to our discussion, which is whether there's Tumas Oel or not. This concludes the Gemara's discussion on Rishon Bar Yochai's statement. Now the Gemara gets to our first of a series of three Mishnahs, one after the other. So the first Mishnah discusses what happens if a Kohen is engaged to someone who a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry. Then he becomes going Gadol before he can do Nisuin. So is he allowed to finish off this marriage and do Nisuin now or not? So the Mishnah talks about two different situations. One is of which the Kohen headed was Nisares, had Kedushin with an Almana, and the other is where a Shomeres Yavam, Yevama, his brother's wife is falling to him to Yibam. She's also obviously an almana. In both these cases, there is a connection, a relationship to the Kohen before he becomes Kohen Gadol. However, they have different halachos. So in the case where he was nisares to an almana and he becomes Kohen Gadol, he is allowed to finish and do chuppah. The Mishnah brings as a support for this the fact that Yeshua ben Gamla was niskadesh to Marta bas Baisus, and the king appointed him to be Kohen Gadol during their engagement. And he went and he finished off that marriage. He did chuppah. So you see, he was allowed to. Now, if there's a Yevama falling to him, and she's falling to him while he was a Kohen Hedyot, he cannot continue and do Yibam once he becomes a Kohen Gadol, even if he had already done Maimer. Even if he already did Kiddushin, he still cannot do Yibam and complete it once he is a Kohen HaGadol. So the Gemara now discusses this halacha. The Gemara brings a brisa. Brisa says, what is the source of the halacha that if he was nisares, had Kiddushin to an almana, then he became Kohen Gadol, he's allowed to? It's from the fact that the Torah, in describing the Isser of Kohen Gadol to an almana, says, Yikach Isha, he should take a woman. It's in the phrase almana u'gusha v'chalal azonas elo lo yikach ki imsul me'ama v'yikach isha. So it says Yikach Isha, he should take a woman. That's to include one situation which he should, and that's referring to where he was nisares to this almana, to this Isha beforehand. So the Gemara says, why doesn't that include a Shomeras Yavam as well? Because it says Isha. Isha is not a Yevama. Yevama would not be called an Isha, and therefore it only refers to where he was engaged to a regular almana, not an almana who was a Yevama. Now the Gemara notes in the story of the story of the Kohen Gadol Yeshua ben Gamla, it says that the king appointed him to be Kohen Gadol. It doesn't say he was appointed to be Kohen Gadol, which would be the general procedure. Was that the appointment wouldn't come from the king; it would come from the other Kohanim in the Sanhedrin. It says, yes, indeed, he was not appointed in the proper channels. He bribed his way in, and that's because he had a close relationship with Martha bas Baisus. As we see, he went and married her. And Martha had bribed Yanai Hamelech with a tarkava dinri, a large amount of gold coins, in order to bribe his way into the position. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. The Mishnah briefly says that a Kohen Gadol whose brother dies is not allowed to do Yibam. Instead, he has to do Chalitza. So the Gemara says, you're giving me a general rule here. You're saying that applies whether to any almana. It doesn't make a difference if it's an almana min erisin or an almana min hanasuin. If the woman was engaged to his brother or if he was married to his brother. Either way, if she falls to Yibam, he can't do Yibam, he has to do Chalitza. The Gemara's question is why? Either way, he's doing a mitzvah daraisa. Now, a mitzvah daraisa defeats a mitzvah saseh defeats a lo saseh. Now, in the case where it's min hanisuin, I understand why it would lose, because it's up against a lo saseh and an aseh. The woman who is trying to do yibum to is an almana, and she's a be'ula. You'd have to be doing the iser of almana lo yikach, and the violating the aseh of marrying a besula only. So in that case, it's the aseh of Yibum against the los aseh of Almana and the aseh of Besula. And therefore it would lose, and he shouldn't do that mitzvah. However, if it was Mina Eirsin, why not? She is still a Besula, she just happens to be an Almana. So it would be an aseh of Yibum against the los aseh of Almana. Why can't he marry her? Why can't he do Yibum? So the reason is because the mitzvah only exists in the first biyah. After that, there's no mitzvah any longer, and he should be aser at that point to stay with her. Now you may say, let him just marry her and do that first biyah to be okay in the mitzvah. The problem is we make a gzeira. If we allow him to do the first biyah, he's going to do more biyahs, and those would be be'isr. Okay. Now the Gemara discusses the next sugya. We introduce our next Mishnah. This is the third Mishnah for the Daf, and here it says that a Kohen, even a Kohen Hedyot, should not marry an islandess. Now the question is, why should she not marry an islandess? The main feature of an islandess, of course, is that she's barren. She cannot bear children. What is the problem with a Kohen Hedyot marrying an islandess? So Rabbi Yehuda understands that it's just a question of being mitzvah and having children. If you marry an islandess, he can't have kids. And of course, we'll ask, this has nothing to do with being a Kohen then. But the only issue, he says, is that he can't marry her because she can't bear him children, and therefore, if he already has been Makayim the mitzvah of Pru Revu, he already has a wife and children enough to Makayim the mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda would say that there's no problem. The Tanakama, that is, would say that there is no issue. Now, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Up till now was the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, even if he was Makayim Pru Revu as well, there's another issue. A Kohen is not allowed to marry an islandess because an islandess has the halacha of a zona. Now, the Gemara is going to explain what does islandess have to do with zona. Shouldn't do anything wrong. Why is she considered to be a zona? Now, the Chachamim disagree. Chachamim say she's not a zona. A zona is only a gioras, a mashucheres, or a shenivala b'ilas znus. That is a convert, because in her previous affiliation, she had many relationships with Avdei Kechavim. A mashucheres is also a convert, because while she was in Shevcha Kenanis, she was permitted to Akum, and a Nivala Bilas Zenos, that is a woman who has Bia with a person that she's usher to, that gives the din of Zona. So our main discussion over here is there an Isser islandess on a Kohen Hedron or not? According to the Tanakama, there is not. It's only a question for Revu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there is. The Gemara says, Reish Galusa asked of Huna, what does this have to do with Kohanim? According to the Tanakama, that the Isser is only because of Puru. Why does it apply to Kohanim? It should apply to everybody. So the Gemara says that you're right, and the answer is that according to the Tanakama, it makes no difference. The only reason we're talking about Kohanim here is because of Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda's halacha of Zona, and an island says the Zona only applies to Kohanim, because the Yisrael Elim are not Usher in the Zona. That's why we're talking about apply to a Yisrael. He should only marry an islandess if he already has children, otherwise he risks losing the mitzvah of Pru Revu. Now, the Gemara wants to know, why is an islandess a zona? What does islandess have to do with Znus, according to Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara says that any bia which cannot bear children is called a bias Zinos, and that's based on what it says, Ichlu v'lo yizbo, Hiznu v'lo yifrotzu. Anything which is no pritza is considered to be a Znos. If it's a bias Znos, then any bia with an Alice makes her into a Zona. So by definition, she's a Zona, not also to Yisrael, but also to Kohanim. Now, the Gemara moves on to the topic of a Ketana. Ketana is going to be very similar here, because the Ketana, just like an islandess, cannot bear children while she is a Ketana. The Gemara says that there's a brayso where Rabbi Eliezer says a Kohen is not allowed to marry a Ketana. Now, the Gemara is very interested in understanding why. So the Gemara says, Rav Chizda said to Rabbi, go learn the sugya well, because in this evening, Rav Huna is going to ask you pshat. What is the reason that Rabbi Eliezer says a Ketana cannot, Kohen cannot marry a Ketana, cannot marry a woman who is less than 12 years old? So the Gemara gives a number of explanations as to why that might be. So the Gemara's first attempt is what Rav Huna came up with. The Gemara says that Rav Huna says that Rabbi Eliezer is a combination of the opinions of Rabbi Meir and the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda in two different sugyas. The opinion of Rabbi Meir is that we're chayish for a miyat, and we're always afraid that any woman is from the miyat, is from a minority, and therefore this woman, as long as she's a ketana, we don't know, she may end up being an islandess. The signs of being an islandess only appear at a certain stage. You can only define them at a certain stage later. So this, if a Kohen is to marry Ketana, he may end up being an islandess. And an islandess would, if she turned out to be an islandess, there would be a problem, because not only does it hold like Rabbi Meir that we're afraid she's an islandess, but also like Rabbi Yehuda that an islandess is a zona. Therefore, a Kohen cannot marry a Ketana because she might be an islandess. So now the Gemara rejects this approach. The Gemara says he does not hold, Rabbi Eliezer in truth does not hold, not like Rabbi Meir and not like Rabbi Yehuda. How do I see that he does not hold like Rabbi Meir? So the Gemara says, because we have a brayso discussing this concern, this issue. Are we afraid that an average katan or ketana is from a minority and is an islandess or a sis? So the Gemara brings a brayso. The brayso says that a katan and ketana cannot do chalitza. That everybody agrees to, because the Torah in the parsha of chalitza says that it's an ish. It uses the term ish when it discusses the mitzvah of chalitza. It says ve'em lo yachbot ha'ish lo kacha says yivimto. So katan ketana cannot do chalitza. However, yibum can katan do yibum or not. That is a machlokes. Rabbi Meir, says cannot do yibum, and the Chachamim say that he can do yibum. A katan and a katana can do yibum. What's the reason? Rabbi Meir says because we're afraid that they're an islandess or stress. In the case of an islandess or stress, there's no mitzvah of yibum, and then there's just an isser of eshes ach. And the Chachamim say no, we follow the roiv. The most children will grow up to be fully functional, not an islandess, not a stress, and therefore you don't have to be concerned about an isser eshes ach. Now in that halacha, how does Rabbi Eliezer hold? So the Brisa that says, Rabbi Eliezer says that a katana is allowed to do yibum, not chalitza, like we said, was allowed to do yibum, according to Rabbi Eliezer. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer clearly does not hold to this opinion of Rabbi Meir. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is he doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda either. He does not hold that an islandess qualifies as a zona. In order to show this, the Gemara is going to quote a Brisa, which shows the opinions of a number of different Tanaim as to what the definition of a zona is. When the Torah says that a Kohen is forbidden from marrying a zona, it says, so what's a zona? So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Brisa says, Rabbi Eliezer begins and it says, a zona is kishma. A zona is a woman who strayed from her husband. Rabbi Kiva says, a zona is any woman who's open. She allows herself, she's hefker, she allows herself to be used by many men. Now, Rabbi Masi ben Chora says, a zona is any woman who did any iser in bia, even if it's with her own husband. If, for example, her husband did kina, he warned her against being misyached, being secluded with a man as part of the sota process, and then she did steer, she was secluded with him, and he took her to Sanhedrin to make her drink sota water. So from that point, he's usher to be with her, and on the way he did stop at a hotel, and he was together with her. That is an isser, and she now, therefore, by that action qualifies as a zona. So any isser performed in the bia realm is a zona according to this opinion, which is Rabbi Masi ben Choresh. Now, the next opinion in this brisa is Rabbi Yehuda. He says that a zona is an islandess, as we were discussing earlier. The Chachamim say a zona is only one who was together with a woman that he saw as asa to, which refers to, therefore, a gioris, a meshucheres, or any other type of bias znos. Now, the brisa next quotes Rabbi Elazar, not to be confused with our Rabbi Eliezer, who says that any time there's a interaction which is out of wedlock, such as a single man and a single woman, not for the sake of marriage, that creates the status of zona as well. So you see from all this, in short, that Rabbi Eliezer does not hold of Rabbi Yehuda relative to what we need here. He does not hold of Rabbi Yehuda that an islandess has the status of a zona. So therefore, we've rejected Rabbi Yehuda's understanding of what pshat is in Rabbi Eliezer, that a Kohen is not allowed to marry an islandess. So we're back to our discussion then. What is the reason that a Kohen is not allowed to marry an islandess? So Rav Ado Avi gives the next explanation. He says we're not talking about a regular Kohen, we're talking about a Kohen Gadol. And the problem is that if he's going to marry, it's not, the phrase here wasn't islandess, the statement was actually a ketana. He's not allowed to marry a ketana. So he says that Kohen Gadol is the one who's not allowed to marry a ketana. And the reason is because the kinyan with a ketana does not take full effect until she grows up, until she reaches maturity. At that point, he's going to be a be'ula, since he's been married to her for a while. And therefore, he can never marry a ketana. Now, the Gemara doesn't like this either. Rabbah calls it mechali lev or mavali lev. He says, what type of marriage are we talking about here? Did her father mekadesh her, or did she mekadesh herself? If her father mekadeshed her, the kedushin is chal right away. Father has the right to be mekadesh his daughter to a man when she's a ketana, the kedushin is chal miyad. It's not true that it waits till she grows up. So that can't be what you're referring to. And if you're referring to the fact that she has the right to be mekadesh herself at some point, true, that does not take effect until she becomes an adult, but everybody agrees that, and even the Rabbanan must agree to that, and the Rabbanan would say that any Kohen Gadol cannot enter a marriage like that. It wouldn't be just Rabbi Eliezer who says that. So they can't be pshat then, and what's happening here. So the Gemara therefore goes for another pshat. The Gemara says that Rava says we're talking about a regular Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol. The problem is that if he's going to be married to a ketana, she may end up becoming asur to him, and that's because she may get seduced by someone. Ketanas are easy to seduce; they're daitim kal, and if she'll be seduced, then she will be a beula, she will be zona then, and she will become asur to him. So the Gemara says, so why is it only a problem on a Kohen? That would be a problem for Yisrael too. Whereas no, it's a problem with Yisrael. The seduction of a katana has a din of ones, has a din of a rape, because she's not smart enough to avoid it. It's a statutory rape, and therefore that wouldn't be usher if her husband was Yisrael. A Kohen, though, where ones does make her usher, there you have a problem, and that's why a Kohen should never marry katana, lest she become nispateh while she's married to him and still a katana. Okay, then whereas next approach, I explain this halacha why a Kohen can't marry a katana. Is Rav Papa. Rav Papa says we're not talking about a regular Kohen, we're talking about a Kohen Gadol. And this Tana holds that a Kohen Gadol is only allowed to marry a Nara, not allowed to marry a Katana, not allowed to marry a Bogeres. And that's learned out of the Psukim. It says that he should marry Isha, and on the other hand, it says Besula. So Isha means not a Katana, Besula means not a Bogeres. So what then is left? A Nara, only in between, from age 12 to 12 and a half. Now the Gemara says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak has a similar halacha from a different source. He brings a brisa that says the term Besula always means Nara, because you find that from the pasuk in Bereshis describing Rivka. It says Vahanara Teves Mara Me'oid Besula V'ish Lo Yida'ah. So the term Nara refers to a Besula. Okay, now the Gemara concludes this discussion with that. The Gemara just before its next Mishnah talks about Rabbi Elazar's halacha of Pani Habala Pnuya, relationship between an unmarried man and woman. Rabbi Elazar said that makes a zona. The Gemara quotes that Rav Amram says that is not the halacha. Any single marriage out of any single interaction out of wedlock does not make that woman asur to Kohanim. All right, now we get to our next Mishnah. Towards the end of the daf, Mishnah says a person should not desist from Puruvu until he was Mekayim, the mitzvah of Puruvu already. He should not stop trying to have children unless he already has enough to be Mekayim the mitzvah. What's the definition of that mitzvah? So Beishambe says 2 boys, Beisil says 1 boy and 1 girl. Like the Torah says, Zachar v'nekeva, Bara'am, the minimum creation is male and female. Okay, so now the Gemara says, we said that he should not so we begin the Gemara. The Gemara says, we said he should not desist from Puruvu. Does that mean, though, that he should actually not be married to a woman at all? He could be married and not do Puruvu. So the Gemara says, there's 2 versions of this. They're opposite. The first version seems to say that he shouldn't do Puruvu, but the implication is that he should still be married. Gemara says that's the support of Nachman, the name of Shmuel, and it says even if a person already was Mekayim the mitzvah of Puruvu, he doesn't have to worry about Puruvu, he should always be married. A person should never stay without a wife. The Torah says, Lo tovies adam levado, a person should not be alone. Now, a different version says that this Mishnah seems to contradict with Rav Nachman's halach in the name of Shmuel, because the Mishnah says that he can desist from Puruvu if he has kids. That implies he doesn't have to stay married at all, which is the opposite of what Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, that he should stay married no matter what. Now, the Gemara says, what's an afkamina? Either way, he'll be in whatever situation he's in. The Gemara says an afkamina is when someone is looking for a wife and he has children, does he have to go look for a wife who can still bear children or not? Now, if he has a mitzvah to be together with a woman who can bear children, then he has to go and spend money. You could even sell a Sefer Torah, the Gemara says, to go marry a woman who has children. If, however, he just has a mitzvah to be married, like Shmuel says, and does not have to bear children, then he could just marry somebody who cannot bear children even, and he doesn't have to spend money, certainly doesn't have to sell, would not be authorized to sell a Sefer Torah in order to marry a woman who is of childbearing ability. That's the difference between the halachos of a man who is obligated to stay married to a woman or a man who is not obligated to bear children, which is the difference between Shmuel's halacha and the Mishnah's halacha, and that's the explanation of why those 2 halachos are taught separately.